March 17, 1943. 0547 hours. Murmansk, Soviet Union. The steel hull groans against ice-crusted dock pilings. Frozen breath hangs in the air like ghosts. A crane swings through the gray Arctic morning, its cables straining under the weight of a wooden crate marked only with stenciled numbers and a single word, Willis. The crate drops. Snow explodes outward. Soviet longshoremen swarm it immediately, crowbars flashing in the half-light. Nails scream as they're wrenched free. Canvas falls away. And there it sits, olive drab paint still smelling of a factory 12,000 miles away in Toledo, Ohio. A Jeep. You wouldn't think much of it. 4 wheels. A flat hood. A canvas top folded down. Barely enough metal to stop a strong wind, let alone a German bullet. But to the Soviet officer standing at the dock's edge, cigarette frozen between cracked lips, this machine represents something his army desperately needs. Speed. Mobility. Survival. By the spring of 1943, the Eastern Front has become a grinding war of attrition stretching from Leningrad to the Caucasus. The Red Army possesses tanks, artillery, millions of men, but it lacks the small, nimble vehicles that keep a modern military connected. Staff officers ride horses. Scouts commandeer. Whatever civilian trucks haven't been reduced to scrap. Communication lines stretch thin across mud and snow and endless steppe. Then America sends a Jeep under the Lend-Lease agreement. President Franklin Roosevelt has committed the United States to supplying the Soviet Union with everything needed to defeat Nazi Germany. Tanks, aircraft, trucks, boots, spam, and tucked among the massive shipments crossing the Atlantic and Pacific, roughly 50,000 Willys MB and 4 GPW Jeeps destined for the Red Army. They arrive in Murmansk aboard convoys that have run the gauntlet of German U-boats and Luftwaffe bombers. They come through Vladivostok on Pacific routes, and through Persia on the southern corridor, driven overland through Iran's mountain passes. Each Jeep that reaches Soviet hands has already survived a journey that would destroy lesser machines. Now the real test begins. Within weeks of arrival, these American-built vehicles scatter across the Eastern Front like seeds on the wind. They carry reconnaissance officers probing German lines at night, headlights taped over, engines barely whispering. They race alongside advancing tank columns, radio operators bouncing in the back seats, calling coordinates to artillery batteries miles behind. They drag wounded men from forward positions, stretchers lashed across their hoods, blood freezing on canvas before medics can intervene. The Soviets call them V, a phonetic rendering of the brand name that becomes synonymous with capability itself. Picture this. A column of T-34 tanks rumbles through a Ukrainian village, treads churning mud into rivers. Behind them, weaving between shell craters and burned-out German half-tracks, come the Jeeps. They don't look like much compared to the 30-ton steel beasts ahead. But the tank commanders know the truth. Without the Jeeps carrying their orders, their fuel reports, their wounded crews, the tanks are blind giants stumbling through enemy territory. By late 1943, Lend-Lease Jeeps have become the nervous system of the Red Army. They are everywhere. General Georgy Zhukov uses them. So do NKVD security battalions hunting partisans in the forests. So do signals units stringing telephone wire across landscapes that change hands weekly. Artillery crews hook 45mm anti-tank guns to Jeep hitches and drag them into firing positions that trucks cannot reach. Scouts strip the windshields entirely, reasoning that shattered glass kills more men than cold air ever could. The Jeep asks for nothing except gasoline and occasional prayer. It climbs grades that stop Soviet-built vehicles cold. It fords streams that would drown heavier machines. It starts in temperatures that freeze the oil in German engines. And slowly, kilometer by kilometer, battle by battle, the machines begin to die. Not all at once, not dramatically, but the Eastern Front consumes everything it touches, men, horses, tanks, and yes, even the indestructible American Jeep. By the winter of 1944, something has changed. The Jeeps are still running, but they are no longer new. January 12, 1945, 0312 hours. A field repair depot outside Warsaw, Poland. The mechanic's hands are black with grease up to the elbows. Frostbite scars mark his knuckles. He hasn't slept in 31 hours, but the Jeep in front of him won't fix itself. And the colonel needs it running by dawn. He stares at the engine block like a surgeon examining a patient who has survived too many operations. The original radiator failed outside Minsk. They replaced it with one salvaged from a burned-out Ford GPW abandoned near Vitebsk. The starter motor died crossing the Vistula. A Soviet-manufactured unit now sits in its place, wired with improvised connections that spark when the temperature drops. The left front tire is German, pulled from a captured Cuba wagon 3 months ago. The seats have been reinforced with wooden planks after the springs finally gave out somewhere in eastern Poland. This Jeep has been rebuilt so many times that almost nothing American remains except the frame and the engine block itself. And even the engine is dying. The mechanic knows this. He can hear it in the rhythm of the pistons, feel it in the vibrations that travel up to the steering column. Somewhere deep inside the machinery, metal is grinding against metal in ways the Toledo engineers never intended. But there are no replacement parts coming. The convoys still arrive at Murmansk, but the cargo holds are filled with ammunition and artillery pieces now, not spare axles for worn-out reconnaissance vehicles. So he does what Soviet mechanics have done since Stalingrad. He cannibalizes. Across the depot, 17 other Jeeps sit in various states of disassembly. Some will never move again. Their frames are twisted, their axles cracked, their engines seized beyond salvation. But their parts live on. A carburetor here, a transmission gear there, windshield wipers, door hinges, fuel pumps rebuilt so many times the original stampings have worn smooth. The Red Army calls this process the Brotherhood Grave. Vehicles die so that others may survive. By the final year of the war, every Lend-Lease Jeep still operating on the Eastern Front has become a Frankenstein creation. Original Willys components mixed with Ford parts, Soviet substitutes, German salvage, and occasionally pieces machined by hand in field workshops using nothing but files and determination. No two Jeeps are identical anymore. Each carries the scars of its own unique journey through the war, and still they run. They carry Soviet officers into Berlin itself during the final assault. They transport NKVD interrogators to prisoner collection points. They race through the burning streets of the Reich capital while artillery shells turn buildings into avalanches of brick and flame. May 8th, 1945. Germany surrenders. The guns fall silent. The Red Army stands victorious across half of Europe. And somewhere in the chaos of celebration, a question arises that nobody in Moscow wants to answer. What happens to the Jeeps now? Under the original Lend-Lease terms, the equipment was loaned, not given. America expected the return of surviving vehicles or compensation for those consumed by war. Theoretically, the Soviets should crate up every functioning Jeep and ship it back across the Atlantic. Theoretically. But look at these machines. Look at what remains of 50,000 vehicles after 4 years of the most brutal mechanized warfare in human history. The Jeeps that survive are held together by field welds and desperation. Their odometers, those that still function, show numbers that would make American mechanics weep. Engines knock. Transmissions slip. Frames sag from carrying loads they were never designed to bear. And the Soviet Union needs them. The war may be over, but the Red Army now occupies half of Europe. Troops must be supplied. Prisoners must be transported. The vast machinery of military occupation requires vehicles, thousands of them, and Soviet factories cannot produce replacements fast enough. So the Jeeps stay. No formal announcement is made. No diplomatic cables discuss the decision. The vehicles simply remain. They continue their duties as if the war never ended, serving now with occupation forces in Germany, Austria, Hungary, Poland. NKVD units use them to patrol the new borders of the Soviet Empire. Internal security forces drive them through the streets of newly liberated capitals. But time has become the enemy now, and unlike the Wehrmacht, time cannot be defeated. September 4th, 1951. 1,423 hours. A collective farm outside Kursk, Soviet Union. The Jeep doesn't look like a Jeep anymore. Its hood has been removed entirely, exposing an engine block caked with 6 years of accumulated grime, oil, and chaff from a dozen harvests. The windshield frame stands empty, the glass shattered long ago during an incident no one remembers clearly. Where the rear seats once carried artillery officers and radio equipment, wooden planks now form a makeshift cargo bed reinforced with salvage metal strapping. The steering wheel is wrapped in rotting canvas. The speedometer needle hasn't moved since 1947, but the engine still runs. Yuri Semyonovich Volkov wipes sweat from his forehead and climbs behind the wheel. He is 53 years old, a former tank commander who lost his left hand at Kursk in 1943 and now manages this collective farm's motor pool. He knows machines the way a doctor knows bodies, and he knows this particular machine is dying. The compression is gone. The transmission grinds through every gear change like bones breaking. The clutch slips so badly that Hills require 3 attempts. But the Regional Agricultural Committee has denied his request for a replacement vehicle, and the farm's quota of sugar beets won't transport itself to the processing plant 12 kilometers away. So, Yuri drives. This is what victory looks like now for the Lend-Lease Jeeps. By the early 1950s, the Red Army has finally begun receiving Soviet-manufactured replacements. The GAZ-67, developed during the war as a domestic alternative, has matured into a reliable platform. The newer GAZ-69, sleeker, more powerful, genuinely designed for post-war conditions, rolls off production lines in Gorky. Soviet generals no longer need American machines cluttering their motor pools. The exile begins. First, the most worn-out Jeeps are stripped from frontline units and transferred to second-tier formations. Internal security troops, border guards patrolling the endless frontiers with China and Afghanistan, militia units in provincial cities where appearance matters less than function. The vehicles still wear military markings, but everyone understands what the transfer means. These Jeeps have been judged expendable. Then comes the next wave of replacements, and suddenly there's no room even in second-line units. The surviving American vehicles are officially decommissioned, struck from military registries with the stroke of bureaucratic pens in Moscow. Their fates now depend entirely on local need and local ingenuity. Collective farms absorb hundreds of them. Agricultural work is brutal on machinery, but collective farm chairmen cannot afford to be selective. If a vehicle moves, it works. The Jeeps haul fertilizer. They drag plows. They transport workers to distant fields at dawn and carry them home at dusk. Some are converted into improvised tractors, their frames extended, their transmissions modified, their identities erased beneath layers of mud and rust and welded modifications. Construction brigades claim others. The post-war Soviet Union is rebuilding itself from the rubble, and every functioning vehicle represents productivity. Jeeps carry bricks to housing projects. They tow cement mixers. They navigate construction sites too cramped for larger trucks. Foremen don't care where the machines came from, only that they continue running. Police units in remote districts inherit the rest. Militia officers in Siberian towns and Central Asian villages receive Jeeps that Moscow considers worthless, then discover the Americans built something remarkable after all. The vehicles survive conditions that destroy Soviet-made alternatives. They start in temperatures that freeze diesel fuel solid. They navigate roads that exist only on optimistic maps. But survival grows harder each year. The problem is parts. Original American components have become impossible to obtain. The Soviet Union and the United States are enemies now. The Cold War has frozen all normal commerce between them. Collective farm mechanics cannot order replacement carburetors from Toledo. Police garage supervisors cannot requisition genuine Willys fuel pumps. So the hybrid machines become more hybrid still. Soviet parts. Captured German components hoarded since the war. Hand-machined substitutes created by village blacksmiths working from memory and intuition. The vehicles that emerge from these repairs bear little resemblance to anything designed in America. Some machines simply stop. Their engines seize. Their frames crack. Their transmissions disintegrate into metal fragments. And when they stop, they do not restart. They become sources of parts themselves, stripped, cannibalized, reduced components that might keep other machines alive a few months longer. The number of surviving Jeeps drops, then drops again. By 1955, something irreversible has begun. The remaining vehicles are not merely wearing out. They are disappearing, vanishing into scrapyards, into welding torches, into the hungry furnaces of Soviet steel plants desperate for raw material. And somewhere in Washington, accountants are still calculating what Moscow owes. October 18, 1972, 0915 hours. A barn outside Novgorod, Soviet Union. The doors haven't opened in 11 years. Rust has fused the hinges. Wooden planks have swollen with moisture until they become part of the structure itself. Vines crawl across the entrance like nature's own padlocks. Inside, darkness holds something the world has almost forgotten. Alexander Dmitrievich Petrov stands before the barn with a crowbar in his weathered hands. He is the grandson of the man who sealed these doors in 1961, a collective farm worker who died without ever explaining what he'd hidden inside. The crowbar bites into rotting wood. Light spills through the gap. And there it sits. Dust covers everything like gray snow. Cobwebs stretch between the steering wheel and the dashboard. Mouse nests occupy the space where seats once held Soviet officers racing toward Berlin. But beneath the decay, beneath the years of abandonment and silence, the shape remains unmistakable. A Jeep, an American Jeep. The faded remains of a white star are still visible on the hood, barely, like a scar that never fully healed. The original olive drab paint shows through where decades of dirt have flaked away. The tires have rotted into brittle shells, but the wheels themselves are genuine Willys steel, stamped with markings from a factory that stopped producing them before Alexander was born. He doesn't know what he's found, but somewhere across the ocean, people would pay fortunes for it. The diplomatic settlement came decades earlier, though it solved nothing for the Jeeps themselves. In 1972, the Soviet Union finally agreed to pay the United States $722 million for Lend-Lease equipment retained after the war, a fraction of the original value, negotiated over 27 years of Cold War hostility. The payment covered everything: tanks, aircraft, trucks, ammunition, food supplies, and 50,000 Jeeps. On paper, the debt was settled. In reality, the machines themselves had long since passed beyond any accountant's reach. Most simply ceased to exist. The scrapyards of the 1960s consumed them by the thousands. Soviet industry, always hungry for raw materials, melted down the frames and engine blocks without sentiment. The steel that once carried partisans through Belarusian forests became rebar in apartment buildings. The aluminum from carburetors that survived Stalingrad transformed into kitchen utensils for Soviet housewives. The Jeeps didn't die. They dissolved. Others vanished more quietly, abandoned in fields when their engines finally surrendered, buried in collapsed barns like the one Alexander now stands inside, pushed into ravines by farmers who needed the space more than the machines, forgotten in remote border posts when newer vehicles arrived, and no one thought to record what happened to the old ones. The paperwork disappeared first, then the memories. By the 1980s, finding a surviving Lend-Lease Jeep in the Soviet Union had become like finding a ghost. Collectors in the West heard rumors, whispers of original Willys, vehicles hidden on collective farms, preserved in military warehouses, occasionally appearing in grainy photographs from provincial museums. Most rumors led nowhere. The few that proved true revealed machines so deteriorated, so modified, so far removed from their original condition that identification required forensic analysis. How do you prove a pile of rust once crossed an ocean? Today, fewer than a dozen confirmed Lend-Lease Jeeps survive in the former Soviet Union. They sit in museums in Moscow and Kubinka, carefully restored by specialists who track down original American parts through international networks. They appear occasionally in private collections, purchased by wealthy enthusiasts who understand they're buying history measured in blood and steel. They draw crowds at military vehicle exhibitions, where old men sometimes weep at the sight of machines their fathers described but they never believed existed. Each survivor carries stories that died with its drivers. The reconnaissance officer who used the steering wheel to navigate German minefields. The signals operator who sat in this seat while calling artillery strikes on Königsberg. The NKVD agent who drove this chassis through the shattered streets of Budapest in 1945. The collective farm worker who kept it running for 15 years after the war through sheer stubbornness and mechanical genius. Their names are lost. Their Jeeps remain. Walk through rural Russia today, and you might still find pieces of them. A axle housing repurposed as fence post. A frame rail serving as a barn door hinge. An engine block, finally seized beyond repair, sitting in a forgotten corner of a village dump like a monument no one remembers erecting. 50,000 machines, 12,000 miles from home, worked to death, recycled into anonymity, or simply swallowed by the vast silence of the Russian countryside. The Jeeps that help when the Eastern Front ask for nothing in return, and nothing is precisely what history gave them. Until now, until someone opens a barn door, until someone remembers.